are still in cars or have forgotten that you don't have cameras, welcome to you too, even though you're black boxes. Ankia and I are very excited about this session because we've been developing, similar to for the couples report, some new training programs over the last couple of months to help us step into this thing that we actually don't know that much about as coaches, which is coaching a pair, whether it's a couple or colleagues. How do we transition from me with my client to me with the relationship as the client and two people in the room? Dynamic, quite different. So very excited about welcoming one of our newest faculty members, Ankia Coetzer here. Most of you know me. So Ankia, just one or two things you want to say about who you are for those people that haven't met you yet.
Sure. It's very exciting that I'm seeing some familiar faces, so that already tells me very good things. So I'm Ankia. I'm the founder of Yellow Cable Consulting, and after more than 20 years in people and organizational strategy roles across the UK and SA, I now bring together coaching, mediation, facilitation, really with a primary focus on helping teams work together better, but also offering individual sessions. And I really, really adore using the Enneagram to uncover those patterns beneath the team dynamics. And so really the intention here is for collaboration to become more honest, more grounded and effective in terms of their performance. So that's me.
Thanks so much, Ankia. She's very humble. I think she's been through the trenches. If you talk about someone who's been 20 years in corporate, working in matrix organizations, and working with all the challenges that come with that, let's just say we've got a war veteran in the room here. And so that's what we're very excited to plug into. In terms of today, we are going to talk a little bit about the specific challenges that come from working in matrix organizations. What does that look like? What does that mean? What is structurally baked into a matrix organization? And what is actually an interpersonal conflict and how can we work with that? So we're going to double click a little bit on that as a structure. And then we are also going to look at some case study examples, a couple of things around the Enneagram and basic theory from the work of Jennifer Garvey-Berger on how we, instead of polarizing the other, bring the other back into right relationship with us, and look at some practical ways in which you might want to apply what we're doing. So there we have it, pairs at work or colleagues. This is what we're playing with today. So we're starting with a quote, and that quote is, if you can laugh together, you can work together. And I think especially when things get really tricky between people, one of the first ways in which we can diagnose this as coaches is when we stop being able to laugh together. So sure, working together over time, there are going to be hot moments. There's going to be stuff going on that won't work out. But can we come back to laughter? Can we find our sense of humor? One of my teachers early in my life was a wonderful intercultural anthropologist, the woman Angeles Arian. And she told a story, which I'm going to share with you now. She was 19 years old, and she was traveling the world, searching for meaning and on a big spiritual quest. And she traveled to different wise people and gurus all over the world and learned from them. And she met a guru in India who said that he is going to give her a 2-piece mantra. And she must say this mantra 7 times a day, 128 times every go for 7 days. And he'll give her the first piece, and then he'll give her the second piece, and she'll put it together. So in week 1, she said 7 times a day, 120 times a pop. Sensa. She sat on a little prayer mat and said it many, many times. Sensa, sensa. And she went back on the second week, and he gave her the second part of the mantra. And that was humor, humor. And it took her about 3 days to realize that she was chanting sense of humor over and over and over again. And that was his big message. Like, if we take ourselves too seriously, there is a way in which our own growth is squished. And the same thing happens between us as people. If we take everything so seriously all the time, we lose the ability to grow together. And that's part of what we want to rekindle is the ability to laugh together, maybe not all the time, but at least some of the time. So we have an interesting little picture here of two people throwing pies at each other and a little bit of collateral damage for the other people sitting around the boardroom table. And so this is part of what we've seen in our work. Yes, some of the time, team interventions are exactly what's needed at work. But some of the time, that is not the case. Some of the time, what we actually need is for the two people who are causing all the tension in the team to get together, sort out their nonsense, move beyond that place so that the team can start working together better. So I'd love to just ask this question and get one or two ideas off the bat. In your mind, when do we need to work with just two people together, a pair of colleagues that are having some conflict, and when do we actually need to get the whole team together? Is there a distinction? What would tell you, I don't have to work with a whole team? This is not a team development intervention. This is just two people that need to figure out how to work more collaboratively. What's the difference? Let's hear some thoughts from the group, because this is where it all starts, like figuring out when we need to do colleagues work versus when we need to do teamwork. Any thoughts welcome here?
Good. Let's see if I get my camera going here. I'll
Hey,
jump on.
Luke.
Why not?
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I was multitasking with it. So in some of the management I do, I would say when two team members are derailing kind of the collective goals of the group repeatedly, and there's a pattern of behavior, that's when I will intervene.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing that follows from that is like sometimes that then polarizes the entire team. When people start feeling they need to choose a camp, and the camp has two people's names at the top. It's between person A and person B. Whose camp are you in? So thanks. Thanks for kicking us off. Now we've got the flow going. Marley and then Daniel.
I was just thinking, I'm sure often the team will tell you that. You know, if you start chatting to them one-on-one and you go, well, what's the problem here? And they'll go, well, those two that just can't. You know, sometimes it'll be that obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust the system's intelligence. Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm now off my car and into my office. Recently, I had a situation because I'm coaching a team where they're kind of two team leaders of, within the team. It's a kind of team of teams. And so putting the two team leaders together in a dialogue was something that we then agreed to do because it was helpful for them to kind of get aligned on what are they actually up to and that they get their stuff together before we kind of get back to the team, and I think there's an iterative process there. So this is why I'm here, because I'm curious about how I can maybe support them in a different way to have a deeper dialogue of how they behave together, because they have an impact on the entire, their teams and the team of teams, right?
Yeah. That's very useful. And I think especially in matrix organizations, you get this quite often, where the head of the vertical and the head of the horizontal in some way have to align and find ways of work, but it doesn't only happen there. It happens in other structures that are intimately connected in the value chain in some way as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
80.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Adrian from Cape Town. Lucille, really appreciate both answers already said by Luke and Daniel. But for me to add to that, I'd say there are so many instances, and it's so dynamic and it's so organic, and it's not only ones that are right, tangible in front of us that we think, oh, those are leaders, or those are problems, or it's just, for me, appreciating that groups are dynamic. Groups have all sorts of role players that fulfill different functions. And depending on what culture change or improvements or goals you're necessarily trying to do with the group as a whole, or your sponsor is trying to do, I think there's so many times you could pull in couples and, dare I say, thruples type reports as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Adi. So just a couple of thoughts. Every team is made up of the relationship of all of those people with the overall mandate of the organization. Something from the Enneagram we could almost define as an understanding of how the social instinct brings a group together and creates a team. And it's also made up of many individual relationships. The leader with each of the individuals in the team, each of the individuals in the team with each other. And so inside a team, there are, if there's, 4 people in the team, there's a number of different configurations of people that work together on different things at different points in time. And so when a team is very strong in the social instinct, often we pay a lot of attention to bringing the whole together. But when we're low on the one-to-one instinct, sometimes we don't pay enough attention to the quality of the connection between the individual parts that make up that team. And we know that we need both the relationship with self-praise, the relationship with the collective, and the relationship with each other to really thrive as a high-performance team. Because at times, we have to hand over the baton from one person to the next in the team. And of course, these things can happen between teams as well. So just a quick heuristic around how these things work. And that is to say that sometimes the reason for bringing 2 people together to do some colleagues coaching is to improve synergy, collaboration, alignment, productivity that might already even be there. We've got 2 people that are quite a dynamic duo, and we want to make sure that we get the best out of this relationship. Sometimes the reason for doing this is that things are going wrong. So there's conflict, there's competition between the 2 of them, there's a polarization that's happening in the team because of that. There's misunderstandings that are coming around time and time again and have a certain flavor. There's a lack of trust between them. And often there you have people being quite specific and poignant about each other being the problem. And we'll look at this idea of polarizing myself as the goodie and the other as the baddie as we get deeper into today's session. And then, of course, there are some other really good proactive reasons. Like, I just want to onboard a new person into the team and get the most out of the relationship from the get-go. So speeding up the getting to know each other, preventing conflict, building understanding in that principle of connection before content. And connection before content is something that I think as people working in coaching and OD, we can say quite glibly. But that does not mean, okay, quickly tick a box so that we can do the real work. Connection before content means that if we really lean into the nature and the quality of relationships, there is something totally different that is born. And that's the kind of thing that comes from, in our part of the world, an understanding of Ubuntu and many other things as well in other parts of the world. So this is a slide for those of you that were in our couple session that you will come to know, but many of you were not there. So I just want to point this out again. When it's me and you, the coach and the client, there's a very different flow of relationships and of conversation and of coaching communication compared to when it's 2 people and the coach. And it looks like this. Sometimes I'm talking to you, the 2 of us as colleagues, and you were talking to me. Sometimes I'm talking to the coach or you're talking to the coach. And who's the coach talking to? Here's the interesting thing. The coach, if I'm working with 2 people together as colleagues, for the duration of that coaching session or the arc of coaching, my client is not you, one or the other. Yeah, because then I'm like, someone who's negotiating on behalf of someone else in some mediation forum. My primary client and the primary space I speak into is the relationship itself. That's who I serve as the coach. And so I'm not, even though sometimes I might address the one person or the other, my client is this third entity called the relationship. And when I'm clear on that, I have much less of a chance of falling into some tricky traps. And those traps could be taking a side, making one person wrong and the other person right, and losing my neutrality. So I want to work at a systemic level in organization relationship systems coaching. We call this the third entity. And that's that invisible thing that exists between the two of us. The other thing that is a lot more likely to happen than when you're just coaching a person alone is the two, if there's a lot of heat in the relationship, may play out the heat and the dynamics live. And I know some of you here in the room have had things like that happen, where you're talking to people and all of a sudden they're starting to have the fight right there in the session. And that holds some particular challenges. Now, if we want this to make this even more complex, outside of this, there is potentially a line manager or a board member or a CEO who said, you two need to go sort your stuff out. And so there's the expectation of someone outside of the room that's also leaning quite heavily into what's happening in this space. So I just want to pause here and ask, those of you that have done this kind of either mediation work or working with two colleagues together in coaching, have any of you experienced times and examples where people started having the friction in the moment? And what's helped you in those kinds of situations where there's a lot of potential heat coming into the room? What's worked? What hasn't worked? We're here to learn together. So what are some of the experiences you've had in coaching two people at the same time? Yeah. Anyone here that'd like to share? Pete.
Yeah, hi, Lucille. Excuse me. It was a long time ago, but I was coaching a couple who came to me for business coaching, but a small company entrepreneurship. But it became quite clear quite soon that it was more than just a business issue, that there was a couple issues. I was early in my coaching career, and I had contracted that I wasn't a marriage counselor. And so we set that quite clear. But what I did find useful with hindsight, and it was just what sort of came up, was to clarify the rules of engagement, and really around the contracting in terms of how the normal stuff, how they'd speak to each other in the room and all of the rest, and what if somebody stepped out, just having a framework that we could go back to in terms of that, and then to allow the conversations to go in that space. But with hindsight, it was a crazy thing to take on, I think.
Well, there's like multiple layers of complexity which part of our lives are we talking about here at this point in time? Yeah, that can be particularly tricky.
In fairness to myself, I had contracted that, but the contract was breached fairly early on.
So at least that was on the table. Daniel, let's hear from you.
Yeah, the example that I have, building on what Pete was saying, because that kind of just jogged my memory, because I was thinking, the session went well, but there were very deep conflictual topics that came up that came from deep wounding in their personal relationship, because they'd been working together for many years, and now this is a new relationship, right, where they are working as peers at a senior level. And because, as Pete was saying, we had spent a lot of time, as part of the team coaching, right, setting up the contracting of how we behave with one another, what the go-to patterns, behavior, what the go-to practices are that we can use if we're feeling attacked by someone else, or if there's something difficult we want to express, etc. We'd spent a lot of time doing it, and I reminded them of that at the beginning of the session. So, you know, I think that is so important that we frame and set that up before we start. And we were able to actually go, if I think about it now, to some really challenging and deep topics. And I hope that they didn't feel, that I was taking sides, like you were saying, or taking, and giving them enough space to be able to speak into their wounding, which actually was helpful. So, yeah. But I haven't had a debrief yet from them, so I want to get their feedback after that. So exactly. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. One of the spaces that I've done quite a lot of coaching into is in the venture capital space, working with co-founders, and mostly in biotech startups in the US and in Europe. And it's often a very interesting pairing. And the pairing there goes, there's someone who does some amazing science, often in a PhD, and they have some great technology, some great breakthrough science that they now want to productize. And they're great scientists. So they need someone who understands business and can raise capital that they then pair up with in a co-founder pair. And those are typically, Ivy League MBAs, and some of them with some experience, but some of them fairly new. And so here you have two fairly young, incredibly brilliant people who speak completely different languages. The one speaks science and wants to do everything in beautiful depth and with rigor, and the other one, talks the talk and knows how to do the marketing story and knows how to sell something that hasn't been built yet. And there's an incredible tension that builds up over time, because the one partner is constantly out there raising money and talking as if things that haven't quite happened yet have already happened. And there's the mortified scientist on the other side who's going, how can you say we've done this already? We've done this twice, and we need to do this 1,000,000 times to be able to make this commercially, right? So bringing those two together to find a third language, which the Enneagram can be so potently, because now we're not talking science or business. We're talking in a shared language around needs, motivations, and fears that comes from the Enneagram, can be incredibly potent. And that's one of the things that I contract up front, is we're learning a third language here, which is the language of collaboration. And we're going to have to speak into that space, and both will have to get out of comfort zones, because we're not going to speak science and we're not going to speak business. I think and that's the third piece, is to contract very specifically that you are in service of the relationship, and that you're not there to pick a side, to say who's wrong and who's right, because sometimes that's what people have more experience of watching TV shows where there's someone who picks a side. Yeah. And so if we haven't experienced that, it's very important to note your neutrality and who you're serving. I'm serving the interests of the organization and the interests of the relational space between the two of you. I'm not going to pick sides. And I often say I'm going to probably upset both of you, but often not quite at the same time. So you'll just have to get used to both being upset at different times for some of the things that might come into the space, and know that it's in service of the relationship. I think what gets tricky at the third level is when, and then we'll hear from you, Sarah Ann, is when there's an HR person or a leader that's not in the room, but that is kind of in your head as the coach, because they've said to you beforehand, now this is the problem. This one does this and that one does that. And so you've got a preempted idea around what's going on in the relationship. And I think that can take us away from being present with the client, because we're too attached to a story we got from someone who's not in the room. And so that's something to be quite careful of. Sarah Ann.
So I love what everyone's saying in terms of this. And so coming from a slightly different space in terms of therapy, I would 100% agree with the lived experience that you're speaking to. when you showed that picture of the, focusing on the us or the relationship in the therapy, certainly that's my experience in therapeutic settings, is you have to focus on that, and to get each of the two people in the room to articulate what is the goal for the us, so that you can hold that out, so they can dip into their pain and their story and their trauma individually, and they've got time and space, and you can hold that frame for each to finish what they have to say, and then the other to speak. And then if it gets attacking, to focus on, can you see what that's doing to the us or to the goal that you've articulated in terms of where this relationship is trying to go? So, can you articulate that in a way that supports the goal that you've expressed here? And I think that also, like you're saying, you're almost going through the harmonics of what's already here, where are we trying to go, and what are the steps to get there?
Yeah, very well put. So if we continue on just a little bit with our ideas here, there are many different ways in which we can design this. The key thing that we have found is that it's very hard to jump straight into two people if we're working with the Enneagram, two people immediately going into the colleagues coaching. Because we've got a framework in play, A, and B, because sometimes we have to think about our own stuff before we go and think about someone else's challenges. Yeah. So generally, if we have a fairly simple situation where we want to improve collegiality, and we're onboarding and we're doing something more proactive, so simpler briefs, often there's some point of contracting, and that might not be the leader or HR, it might be one of the people. Maybe you're coaching this person and they say, can you help me get along better with this other person that I work with all the time? So it might be that. But there's some contracting. Generally, then this is the point where we do the Enneagram. We might have a quick call with both parties saying, this is the process, here's the rules of engagement, this is how it's going to work. And then we do individual feedback sessions before we get together. The one thing that is important to note is that things take longer because there's more playback involved. What did you hear them say? Can you feed back what you learned? Can you say that again? You're feeding back. So if you, for example, working in 60 minutes in your individual sessions, you need at least 90 minutes, if not 2 hours, for the work together. So just in your mind already know when there are 3 people in the room, not just 2, it takes longer to cover the same kind of ground. What I also find is that just doing that session is a little bit rough around the edges. So it's very useful to have a follow-up session. So here we're wanting to make some commitments. We'll talk about what that might be. But at the very least, you want a follow-up session to check in. How is it going now? What's changed? What's shifted? What hasn't yet? What do we want to revisit? Of course, this might be 2 or 3 or 4 sessions as well. Yeah, if there's more that we want to do. Then if we've got a more complex issue arising, sometimes what we need to do is we need to work individually, together, and maybe there is a third party involved who might be a line manager or someone else who comes in at the start of the contracting and again at the finish. So know that that's your other kind of design option that you have is together, separate, together, separate, together, separate, which you can also work with over time. Yeah. And there's pros and cons to each of these designs, but just to help you start thinking a little bit pragmatically around it. So when you're doing one of those 90-minute sessions, or maybe 2 or 3, what are some of the example outputs that you can work towards? So there's the conversation, which builds self-awareness, other awareness, and helps us see where we're coming from, what we're working towards, to recommit to the goals in some kind of way. But what are some of the outputs that we can work with here in the coaching? So part of that is and Sarah Ann said that so beautifully, is, Why are we here? What's the broader goal for this conversation? But to say, what's the purpose of our work together? What is the collective mandate that we're serving? Why is it important for us to get this relationship right in the value chain of the business? So clear articulation of that, because if there's a why, we are a lot more forgiving with each other. Then sometimes you can work on an articulation of what are two strengths we appreciate in each other, and what's one pattern of friction that we want to name, that we want to work to improve. So that idea of always working with ratios in this, sometimes it might be hard to get double the amount of appreciation to the amount of problems that are defined, but we don't just go for what is it that we want to improve. We want to also go for appreciation, strengths, things we like about working together, so that kind of neural pathways that keeps us in the towards state can be solidified. In workplace settings, a boundary or a decision right to clarify. So when we work together, where is it that the chafing happens? Where I feel you're stepping into my territory, you're stepping into mine, or where actually what we're doing is we headbutting because we're not clear how we make decisions here. Is it your call? Is it my call? Is it our call? Must we agree on these things? So clarifying boundaries or decision rights, when those are clearly defined, sometimes a lot of the conflict goes away. We, for example, recently in a project meeting had something where there was a butting of heads between me and a colleague, and we could say very clearly to each other, it feels like you're doing work in my territory now. And if you're worried that I'm not getting to that work, then that's the thing to say. But to start doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing, that's a tricky bit. Now, having defined that, within 2 hours, the tension that had been building had dissipated. Very useful to name some behavioral experiments. What are we going to try and do differently? So in our next one-on-one check-in or on the next project, we work together. How are we going to do this in a way that meets each other's needs better? And in this kind of space, of course, feelings, needs, conversations that comes from nonviolent communication, for example, very useful work. And then just like, who's the sponsor outside of the coach, but someone in the business that we want to check in with, that we want to get feedback from, and what is the cadence of that? So those are some of the outputs you can work towards when you're doing some of the joint coaching sessions. So here's another question. What are some of the typical, so of course, there's a million options, but what are some of the typical pairs that you think, when you think of the typical organizations that you work in? What are some of the pairs that often need support to work together? I'll name the first one, and then you guys can name another one. So co-founders that we've already got in the room. Another one that I see quite often is the CEO and the CFO. That is a really crucial work pair. And it can go wrong, and it can be deeper down in the organization, the version of that plays out at that level, the head of the unit and the finance person who's taking care of that. I mean, I worked in a government department a couple of years ago together with our wonderful colleague Makati, where we were working in a space where the CEO and the CFO, other than in meetings when they were talking to each other nicely, had not been in a one-on-one conversation with each other for 3.5 years because they were so upset with each other. Yeah? Okay, what are some of the other typical, if you isolate it into roles that often have some kind of built-in challenge in the kinds of spaces that you work in? What else do you see? Pete.
Sales and operations.
Oh, yes. There we go. Sales and operations over and over and over again. Another version of that is front room front office, back office, right? So the people that are making the promises out in the world and the admin, you know, the people that are needing to pick up what's happening there. Brilliant. Other typical places where these relationships get tricky. Kate.
Hi, Lucille. So I'm seeing it a lot, but I'm identifying Enneagram patterns.
Yeah.
So I'm dealing right now with a pair in an organization, 1 and 7.
Yes.
Big problem.
Mm.
I also have a lot of tension and conflict happening right now, but in a team where it's leader versus the team.
Mm.
And that I'm really struggling to find a solution or a resolution for, because the whole team have almost become like one individual versus the leader. Very difficult. And
Yeah.
so if I can say, I've got an 8 leader, and my team is a combination of various other types, but have really solidly formed a problem with there's and vice versa. So yeah, that's just something at the moment I'm really struggling with. So yeah, that's my Enneagram types that I'm identifying.
Thanks.
That tend to clash, and conflict.
I think 1 and 7 is one of the most classic team tensions in a team. The 1 and the 7 often, like at the start, they think they're going to save each other's lives, and then in the end, they just like drive each other absolutely bonkers. One way of looking, Kate, I'll just offer this, use this or lose this, where the leader and the team, so the team have almost become like an entity that's in relationship with the leader in this conflict space. This happens sometimes when there is a lot of conforming energy from a maturity perspective. Because in the conforming stage, if you're not being a good mommy or daddy as the leader, then we become like a little tight pack of chihuahuas. And the tight pack of chihuahuas will bite at the ankles until they take the leader down. And they almost become like, no one sticks their head out enough for it to be an individual that has the problem. So it's almost like the leader gets a bit stuck because I don't have it. I can't quite get at what the issue is, because it's all very non-specific, but it boils down to you not being a good mommy or daddy. You're not giving us enough certainty. You're not playing according to our rules. And so we become like the pack of chihuahuas. And yeah, it's an interesting one to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Going back to the maturity, that gravity, those places of gravity. Yeah, okay, thank you. I can see that, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ankia, in your experience, are there particular kinds of role clashes in an organization that you see play out regardless of the players? So maybe, they have to figure out those relationships because they're always going to be closely knit together on opposite sides of the value chain, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the obvious one that has been referenced but not explicitly stated is just the subordinate leader, right? I think that's a typical one, and it's often the person who has less power that would need intervention, seeking that intervention and not necessarily having the remit or being the sponsor. So I think that is often quite a challenging one to solve, and kind of what you're referring to, Kate, in a more of a group way. But yeah, I think wherever there's a joint mandate of some kind, whether it's a group objective or a business strategy or a KPI of some kind, but there's a change in the power dynamics around the reporting lines and the hierarchies, however that manifests itself, I think that inevitably it's not just the what we're doing, but the how we're going to do it that often creates a little bit of tension, and oftentimes healthy, necessary. But yeah, I think where it's immature or high pressure environments, typically you tend to see the patterns emerge and the conflict arise.
Yeah, we're working at the moment as well in an academic institution, and there you have the academic staff versus the administrative staff that are also in this. There's not just a role play, but there is a rank play in there as well, because the academics inevitably have more rank than the administrative staff. And so a lot of what plays out then is passive aggressive behavior is where there's a lack of power. And so that can create its own problems. Adi, let's hear from you, and then I'll give you just a couple of other examples as food for thought, everyone.
Thanks. I mean, what you said, I'm leading on from those last two, is really what I wanted to just raise in terms of that leader and subordinate. I'm working with a software team at the moment. They're quite big, they're dysfunctional, lots of people who lead from a 2 in the Enneagram space. So I perceive there's quite a bit of resentment in there. And then the leader leads from a 9. So just when Ankia was speaking there, and she was talking about subordinates and leaders, what else happens, I think, in these bigger teams is there's actually peers who need this done. And the peers need it because maybe the 9 leader and various other people in the team need it, or various compositions, because the 9 actually can't solve it often, or needs their own individual coaching to solve it. But what I'm seeing the corporate doing is just going into, well, let's put the one person on a warning or something, rather than maybe solve situations which could be done much softer by maybe dealing with the individuals in the team, the leader in the team.
Yeah, but now there's a systemic pattern that can be really troublesome. So the Enneagram 9 leader doesn't lean into the conflicts that naturally occur in any team. It'll happen. And through leaning out, because I don't like conflict, the pair problems just like have little pair problem babies all over the system. And if the system is then reacting from an HR grievance perspective and just handing out grievances, then you can get something that's quite problematic very quickly. Yeah, so very good example there, Adi. So here are some other examples. The CEO and the head of the chief people officer, COO and the head of supply chain. Ooh, that was anyone with supply chain. There's always like an interesting problem there. I am projecting. Sorry, supply chain people listening to this all over the world. I love you. Yes. Moving on. Product managers and engineering leads, sales and marketing, country managers and global business unit leaders. Finance and ops, head of risk compliance, and anyone who's actually trying to get something done. So yeah, there are some interesting places where these things go down in an agile environment. Often the business owner and the product owner can have real butting of heads, or the business owner and the scrum master, depending on how that system is set up as well. And often the product owner or the scrum master is protecting the team in some way from the business owner breaking the agile principles, and then there's massive conflict that arises. So that's also some examples that we can look at. So I want us to talk about matrices just for a brief moment, and then we'll get into our examples from Ankia's side. So there are different ways in which matrix structures are set up, right? But just to clarify, what you generally have is you've got a vertical axis and a horizontal axis, and that might be global into regions. It might be projects and functions. There's a lot of different ways in which this plays out. And what you would then have in many places is, if this is me, this is my line manager, and my line manager is the person who does my performance evaluation. And then this is the person that I have a dotted line to, but actually most of my time is spent serving this project. And so one of the first things that happens in this space is that this person and this person often have like a crucial way that they need to figure out how to interact with each other. Because if they get in competition with each other, these people here in the matrix are the ones that suffer. The second thing that can happen here is that because my work is spent inside this project, I do a lot of stuff that my line manager never sees, because they just oversee the technical aspects of what I'm doing and the process that I'm following, the processes, and they can mentor me when I have problems. But then when it comes performance evaluation time, this person says, oh, you're a 3 out of 5, even though my contribution here has been 4 out of 5, but they don't see it. So they don't know. And if these two don't get along, then that has a massive impact on whether they're going to align on my performance rating. Ankia, what are some of the challenges that you've seen? You've worked in matrix organizations, right? So how does this set up pairs for conflict in different ways in your experience?
Yeah, you'd think I was further removed from it, but yeah, just hearing you talk really PTSD for me still. I think another thing to add to matrix organizations is some organizations try and formalize that matrix structure with, permanent lines and dotted lines on the org charts, etc. But oftentimes what I found is that the matrix organization is implied or informal or discussed, but not formalized. And again, that adds a whole layer of flexibility from a business perspective, but from an interpersonal relationship and the leaders involved in terms of their egos coming into play, like their views on how to do things. Again, I think it's often quite difficult for an organization to culturally have a matrix organization that is effective and clearly understood, and where limited conflict is introduced. But yeah, I think typically global organizations, it can be functionally based, it can be location based. There's many iterations of that. And I must say, in the last 10 years of doing kind of system implementation work, if you can't articulate the rules around it, you can't implement systems. And if you can't implement systems, you often find that things fall over, right? And I've genuinely never seen this done successfully. From a top-down hierarchical perspective, just because there's so many different ways you can slice this. And unless there's very clear direction from the top, I think it's difficult to follow through on that.
Yeah. So if any of you as coaches are working in matrix organizations, know that there is such a rich field of work for you in there. So I sat recently with the head of retail in one of the banks, and I just said, okay, you're like 18 months down the line of implementing this more matrix-based structure. Tell me, where are the pairings that everything hinges on, and how are they doing? And he immediately, it didn't take 5 seconds of processing. This is what keeps him awake at night. He says, here are 4 pairings. So much of our business hinges on those 4 pairs getting it right. And this is my rating for them. And let's go do some of that coaching right now. So if you're working in matrix organizations, you've got work. You just need to get the right person to figure out that this pair thing is part of what's going on. Pete, I see your hand.
Yeah, it may be going back a little bit, but I'm really curious about matrix organizations, or the successful matrix organizations, and the maturity therein, specifically of the leaders. Because, Ankia, I agree with you. I've seen very, very few matrix organizations work. It seems to be like manna from heaven, but the enabling capabilities and competencies, I think, need to be quite far down the maturity scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we see, and I mean, there's a lot of people that work in the implementation of matrix organization spaces, and it's very similar to when you're implementing things like agile, right? If you think we can just make technical and process systemic shifts, it's going to fall flat. So you need people with the insight that there is a whole behavior shift that is required. And the core thing that happens here is, in a matrix organization, if the only way you feel comfortable to manage is by having control, you are going to recreate the silos of control that existed before you implemented the matrix. Now, we know that control and specializing stages of maturity are very big buddies. So for these people that are sitting here in these spaces, performing is the bare minimum of what makes this work. but it's actually a lot more complex because of the way in which we have to work with influence and multiple perspectives and decision rights. And so you need a couple of people dotted around the system that have incredibly good strategizing capability. And you need a couple of people who work in the equivalent of Scrum Masters that help ease. So you need very strong OD skills. You can't just have HR business partnering skills in this kind of space. You need kind of the OD type skills that are at internalizing at the very least to smooth over the challenges that we bring in here. Ankia.
Yeah, I think I was just, as Pete and I were saying, how we've not seen this done well. I've seen versions of it more effective than elsewhere in major consultancy firms, but at an incredible cost. The manpower and the additional time spent talking about the softer skills of people management and reviews and calibrating performances and contributions, it comes at an incredible cost that personally I just can't see as very efficient. Just because you've got these overlays and these people dotted around, but keeping everybody aligned. Yeah, it's labor intensive at best.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just a couple of thoughts around when pairs work, the matrix breathes. When pairs stall, the matrix clogs. And there are many of these pairs. But just a couple of ways in which this works in the matrix. So real work moves through these pair relationships, the verticals and the horizontals. And what needs to happen here is that competing priorities and trade-offs need to be managed fairly quickly. And within this, you've got role ambiguity because you've got people in the middle who often feel that they're serving two bosses. And when you listen to people in organizations that say they've done this fairly well, and interestingly, many of the examples that I've heard of that have done this somewhat well are Asian organizations. And so there's a slightly different mindset to the hyper-competitive Western mindset that might work here. But I mean, what I've heard one leader say is like, very quickly, you have to make peace with the fact that you have two bosses. And you have to see what strengths they have and you have to leverage them both. Then performance management, the invisible work to the rating manager due to the work in the BU distorts evaluations. We've spoken about that. Hidden decision rights. So similar titles mask real authority that must be negotiated. So, I mean, one of the systems we work in, like there are so many things called EXCO or executive committee that you don't even know which EXCO is the real EXCO because there's the retail EXCO and then there's the segment EXCO and then each of those people have their own EXCOs before you know it. And then there's the overall EXCO of the organization. There's like 4 layers of EXCOs. And so who's the actual, where do the actual decisions get made and how do we negotiate those? There's diffuse accountability. So if 2 people need to sign off, sometimes, you know, there's soft vetoes, passive aggressive ways in which things can play out. There's very high risk of decisions being reopened once they've been made. Now, this is a big thing. We bed it down. And in the next iteration, we go, we just have to revisit. Someone raises a risk. Someone in the horizontal challenges the vertical, and we back to where we started. And I've worked with leaders where that's a really big deal. Rivalry for resources. So who gets the money? Who gets prioritized? If the horizontal and the vertical are asking for things, who gets listened to? Who gets to the bottom of the pile? Sometimes there's shadow hierarchies. And so the meetings before the meetings, even in matrix organizations, it's very hard to not be in a meeting all the time. But the informal meetings to align for the formal meetings also become crazy. Need for control duplicates processes locally that belong globally and all kinds of things like that. The power asymmetry destroys psychological safety. And I sometimes work with someone who's my friend on one project and my foe on another project. And this blurred boundaries means that I don't even know how to relate to you, because in the first half of the meeting, we're totally aligned. And in the second half of meeting, when we talk about the second project, we at each other's throats. And so what is the nature of our relationship here? Which needs a lot more tending and care, exactly as Ankia said, the amount of labor that then has to go into making these relationships work is just so much more than if it were a straight reporting line. Now, for those of you sitting here, you're not org design specialists, so you're not necessarily choosing whether you're building functional hierarchies or matrices. But if you are working in matrix organizations, know that all of these things are very good reasons why a lot of pair work can be valuable. And sometimes the pair work can be more valuable than the teamwork, because are we working with a team as defined vertically or the team as defined horizontally? Just gets incredibly complex. Anything you want to add here, Ankia, at this point?
No, I think this slide really sets us up well for the case study.
Yeah, great. So I think we've looked at most of these tensions in the matrix organization already, but I want to speak about the fifth one, because there are some coaches here in the system and that will be watching this video that work in kind of ecosystems where the VC building model is to build platform companies that then buy lots of smaller organizations and create this matrix where there's the head office that's adding value, and then you've got the partner firms on the side in the matrix. And what often happens in the first couple of years of this relationship forming is that the scaled solutions that come from the head office, that is the value add why the companies buy into these kind of platform businesses, take time to mature. And because of that, often in the first couple of years, the people at the partner level firms go, oh, I don't know why I did this. This is not paying value. And you're making promises and the value add's not materializing. Or you're saying you're going to give us scale and benefits, but you're not seeing my localized needs. And before, I could be very niche and localized in the kinds of needs that I entail. And it's very important, if you coach into this platform-based businesses, that you don't make the vertical or the horizontal wrong, but to rather support the organization to build those relationships between the partner firms and the head office role players so that the benefit can materialize quicker. At the point where you're working with them, they've bought in, they're in there for better or for worse. And they probably, and what can happen is, as coaches, if we're, for example, working with the partner firms, we can very quickly demonize head office. And when we're coaching people in the head office space, we can very equally polarize head office as being in opposition to some of these partner firms. So for those of you that are working in those aggregator platform type environments, just keep this in mind in terms of your coaching neutrality, whether you're coaching an individual or coaching pairs across the verticals and horizontals. So we are going to look at some case studies. And what we're going to look at here is really nicely put by Henry Ford. It's not just about coming together. That's just the beginning. Keeping together is progress. And working together consistently over time, that's the kind of definition of success in these kinds of pair relationships. So we are going to start with a relationship that is already working well between Ankia and Sally Sample, who of course is our pseudonym for someone we're going to be talking about here. But Ankia, just set a bit of the context for us. What's going on in this relationship? What are we talking about? What are we talking and feeling into, keeping in mind this is a 6-9 pairing? Tell us more about the context here.
Sure. And for all of my PTSD and moans about corporate, I like that we're starting with a positive. So the context of this pair in this report is obviously myself and Sally Sample. So we first worked together in a really demanding, high-pressure environment where we very quickly built trust under fire, really. And this translated into a really strong friendship. which today would probably be defined as corporate trauma bonding. But about 2 years after we both left this troublesome organization where we met, we both moved on from that difficult environment. And on numerous late nights, we lived in a similar area and we stayed working in similar areas. And so on these numerous late night London bus rides together, would contemplate all the things of work and life together. And it was during this time that we decided to become business partners. And the way that took shape is that we decided to buy and renovate a rundown house together in London. So our Enneagram reports were not available at this time of our lives. But reading it now, it's finally given us both some language, and it really explains it beautifully why we worked so well together during this process. We've often thought about this over the last decade, like why were we able to do this so well together? Why were we able to enter into such a stressful, very, very high value, very, very stress levels of, house renovations and having careers and all sorts of other things at the same time? Why did it work so well? Why did we never have one fight, despite my nickname being feisty at university? But yeah, so we've often thought about like what was it that made it so well? And now that we have this report of us together as the 6 and the 9 and all of the kind of instinct underlying tones in that as well, it kind of defines why we worked together so well. It was such a success that we were able to sell at great profit and kind of move on and carry on in our lives. So we're even at the point now that we've got this report and the Enneagram and the Aephoria language around it, we're considering collaborating again in some kind of business venture, just because we were now able to articulate that it wasn't fluke, it wasn't just luck of the draw, but there are some combinations of our own Enneagram types and our patterns here that are really well suited towards kind of joint ventures. And so we're hoping with her work in HR investigations and culture risks and my workplace dynamics focus, that maybe there's a collaboration. And we're even talking about another property project in the future. So just because this report has kind of cemented those measures of success.
So the things that we're showing you here are all snapshots from the report, from different parts of the report. So, I mean, Ankia, if you had to highlight some of the things and just name in the 6-9 relationship, which just note people that this is a relationship on a line to each other. And by the way, it's not just a collegial line that works quite well. I know many 6s and 9s that are married to each other too. So this is a line that seems to play out for better or worse across multiple environments. But Ankia, what's worked so well between you and Sally? If you had to highlight things that the report gave you language for, what's the magic sauce here?
Yeah, so I think just before we get into that, Lucille, what made this obviously so important, if it wasn't obvious from my context, but just as friends to co-invest and renovate a property when, I was studying part-time, taking on a new role, still fulfilling another role. It's financially significant, high stress. It requires shared accountability, fairness, harmony while living together. Like, I think these things are really, really important. And I think another important factor was we kind of started on unequal terms. I didn't have enough savings for deposit and she didn't have enough earnings to meet the mortgage bond requirements. And so that inequality had to lead to equality as well. So that context, I think, plays in as well. And then I think some of the things that works well with this particular pairing with the 6 and the 9, I think it's like you mentioned, the lines to each other, the complementary wiring. So I think the 6's pace, questioning, systems thinking, balanced by her need for, harmony, kind of a calm steadiness that the 9 brings, very diplomatic problem solving, very, very infrequently heated. In fact, I mean, I've now known her since 2011, never seen her kind of lose it in any way. It's always very restrained. And so whilst I drive that momentum with my 6ness, she anchored kind of that rhythm. And so that complementary balance really, really works well. It allowed us to stay productive and connected without, and I can genuinely hand on heart say, we did not have one fight or one argument about anything. And I think when we spoke about it recently as well, this combination worked well because there was a basis of trust. It wasn't just a random 6 and 9. There was a history there that meant that these complementary wirings were elevated and already obvious to both of us. So I think that it just, we now that there's any language around it, I can see also some of the trifix numbers coming in. There's a 5 in her trifix as well. And so I would never go to her with a bathroom layout or plumbing situation without giving her the facts. It was something that I identified that makes her more reassured, having some information rather than just a random conversation. Or just by the way, this needs to happen without having the facts and figures there. And so again, I think we saw that in each other and kind of honored that.
If I just take a step back, I think there's something so important that you say there, and that is, this is not some random 6-9 pairing. There was a foundation of trust. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Not all pairings that look exactly the same will have the same experience, because if we've got a shared trust relationship, and we know that from some of the teamwork as well, like the foundation for these things, it's trust. And from trust, we can build some of the other higher order behaviors. And so if we met you two at the start of your working relationship together, saying, okay, now we're going to force you into, it's like one of those weird reality shows, like blind renovation dating or whatever thing. I don't know, these reality shows become weirder and weirder over time. But we have this idea that now you're going to do this together. Obviously, regardless of whether the 6-9 dynamic has the potential to be brilliant, we'd have to go, okay, let's build some trust. Let's set some ground rules. What do you both need to feel comfortable in this? And so when we meet two people working together where the trust relationship is already there, the conversation will be very different to one where that trust relationship either still has to be established or has been eroded. Yeah. So you also found this part of the report, which is around the development sections for each of you, and then how do we work together, quite useful. Anything you want to highlight that's been meaningful for the two of you as you contemplate another venture together?
Yeah, I think just, again, if I think about this pairing, if it was me with someone else or a different Enneatype, like what were the practices that sustained this particular relationship and helped to elongate that trust basis, right? And I think it's things that we both value, even though our numbers are so different, is upfront clarity. And I mean, just a bit of an overshare, but I made her do a Pinterest board of what she likes in design before we even signed the contract for the house. So those sorts of things is something that she appreciated. I can imagine if I did that with someone else, like a 7, they might start that, but go like, oh no, this feels like too much effort. And so some of those really peculiarities and those clarity, the boundaries, the transparencies, the spreadsheets, somebody else might look at me and go, I'm cuckoo. And she was like, oh my gosh, you're so organized. And you make it clear and I know where we are. And so again, those dynamics which we took for granted, we now know is again our patterns and the things that make us feel safe. And we were able to recognize that in each other. And just, I mean, something that you said earlier today is just that, dose of humor. I think, especially humor under pressure, that definitely came in. And every now and again, a bit of wine on the tension nights, just again to break our own patterns of over planning, her not expressing particular needs or wanting to maybe have a different view on something. So there wasn't that micromanagement elements that I'm maybe known for. And again, her diplomacy tendencies, she countered without knowing that she was, by also voicing concerns where she felt strongly. So some of those practices definitely did sustain it. And again, if it was a pair that didn't already have those trust, with this combination, bring it in early. It wouldn't be seen as onerous for this particular pairing.
Yeah. Yeah. And interesting here around the things that it says you can do together. So predictable touch points. So it's not just randomly ambushing each other, but predictable touch points. Like you can lead with risks, but then she can summarize options and, take a little pause before we move forward. Give each other turns to lead. Name stresses and, have the glass of wine and laugh about it together and celebrate closure. So a question, when you had the successful, like, kind of completion of this project over many years together, how did you celebrate the success?
I love that I actually have an answer for this, even though we didn't prep for this. But yeah, so we, again, because of my over tendency and risk aversion and, we're putting in extra money in the joint account, we ended up having more money in our joint account after we split it. And we ended up going away for a weekend. And we still weren't sick of each other at this stage. But yeah, again, it was a moment to mark the closure and go, right, this is a nice little bow on this project, and we can feel good about kind of our progress. So yeah, that was definitely something that I hadn't thought about for ages. Thank you.
Brilliant. And so that gives you the idea. Sometimes the report is useful not because there's conflict, but because it helps us like kind of get even more of the flow going. And what you generally find is we're trying to tap in with that report on things that in healthy relationships might naturally happen anyway. So just a moment there, anyone with a question or a comment around this 9-6 combo for Ankia or for myself before we move on to a spicier example? Marley.
Sorry, not to make this all too personal. I'm Ankia's sister and a 7. And after she had the wonderful experience with Roanna, she moved to Cape Town and we bought a property together. And I think I felt a little personally attacked by the wonderful relationship that her and Roanna built. And it was just making me think like, oh, sorry, Sally. Ankia and Sally. I think the trust that we're talking about that they already had, they built that in working together because of those commonalities. And like when I read those words, like I know my sister so well, the loyalty and they needing like accountability and like just show up when like she just needs you to do what you said you were going to do. So it's like those patterns made them work well together, which then made them able to be friends with. So I really feel like that patterning was more important than anything else, really. And especially if I then view you and I had a very broad trust base, being sisters together in the world and happy, loving sisters. But it was very different for us to renovate and decorate the property together. And I knew I was frustrating the hell out of my sister, but I'm like, no, we'll just figure it out when we get there. And she's like, but the taxes and the, so it's literally just, yeah, different. Like I'm the same as Ankia. I'm just so blown away by how clear and obvious these things become when you understand this frame and this pattern and these reports with the two people next to each other. I mean, I've just been blown away by how specific and practically applicable it is. Like, I think it's not even saying too much that Ankia and I have now had many conversations about our different Enneagram styles and stuff. We haven't even done a couples report. We should. But it is so useful. So I can only imagine in any like professional or coaching sort of scenario, like it honestly just has these gems where you just look at each other and go, wow, that's you. Oh my gosh, that's you. And my couple friends who've done it before, they said to me, it's like someone lives in our house and listen to our fights. Like that's how accurate the examples and the pieces in it that says a 6 might need this, a 7 might need that. It's eerily accurate and useful. So you really should all take a little gander at it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Madly. So let's talk about the other example. This is an interesting one because it also happens across the lines. And here we have Sam Sample, no family of Sally, but Sam Sample and Ankia in a very challenging relationship. Ankia, do you want to give us a bit of context here? Tell us more about this relationship.
Sure. And I just started off by saying this is my sacred circle of trust. So this is a very real example. If you go and look on my LinkedIn, you can go and put some pieces together, but we will keep it as anonymous as we can. But this particular case study explores myself, again, me and the 6. And we'll just call him K because I'll forget about Sam. But this was a salesperson who got promoted into like a managing director role for a very large, prominent global tech company based in South Africa for the local organization. And again, this is where some of those examples that we spoke about, the matrixed organization, definitely surfaced. It wasn't officially matrixed, it was unofficially and very informally matrixed, just due to location and kind of work outcomes. So Kay led the sales, I led customer success. And if you've ever worked with tech organizations, you'll know that sometimes customer success sits in sales, and oftentimes it doesn't. And even that in itself is a whole session on its own. But they're complementary but distinct functions for those of you that may not be familiar with the terms, and each reporting into separate global structures. So whilst we're in South Africa, we in this global organization. So I had a change of managers. I was reported to manager 1, and then towards the last 8 months of my stay there, reported to manager 2. And Kay had this local operational authority responsible for sales. And also his leadership was globally, but elsewhere, all very, very interesting. One of the reasons I moved and transferred from London to South Africa with this organization, and at manager 1's request, was for me to informally coach this MD on the company culture, on global standards, just to help him integrate into the broader system of this company. Because 1, I'd been there for longer, and 2, I'd had global experience as being part of the European headquarters because I started in London. And so just to be clear, so Sam sample, okay, here is type 3, so very ambitious, very image conscious, and fairly fast paced in certain circumstances. And again, you guys will know type 6, very loyal, analytical, and risk attuned. And I'm a social 6 as well, which I also think is relevant. Those instincts always come into play. And that mix with this particular pairing offered so much potential in terms of synergies, but under stress, which was the nature of the environment and the tough market and economics, just meant that constant clashes, which started quite covert and ultimately leading to me sitting in front of you, not working there anymore, is the very, very true conclusion to this. So that's a little bit of context setting.
What strikes me when I look at these profiles next to each other is that they are so similar. Both dominant social instincts, both neglected self-praise, both have 6 and 8 in the trifix. So the only difference is what you lead from, and in the heart center, 3 versus 4. And so, you know, when we look at this on paper, we might think, well, these two should get along quite well, because, I mean, part of the theory, at least, is people who with similar instinct stacks get along better. And yet we also know that there's a little bit of 8-6 territorialism, can we call it that, that can come in. So if our territories are not clearly defined, we spoke earlier about boundaries overlapping and getting involved in each other's business, then I guess this could get quite feisty over time. So tell us a bit more about what worked well and what didn't work well, maybe skewed towards the latter. I don't know.
No, sure. So just I think it's important, even though these functions didn't report together, there was such overlap. I mean, the person in his organization that was my day-to-day contact, you know, we called each other besties because we were jointly responsible for various outcomes, but on the same accounts. And so very forced collaboration through the role definitions, not necessarily reporting line definitions as such. And so again, like functions very vital to the outcomes and the kind of KPIs that we had. But again, they operate from different levels. Like sales want to sell and customer success want to keep happy and build on relationships. And those two don't always meet. So I think if I really reflect back on it, and this is on both parts, what made it really difficult and what we tried and kind of what shifted and remained stuck and all of those kind of headings was really comes down to ego, legitimacy, and then what I refer to as like lack of containment. So even though I was asked to guide and coach very informally, you know, this person perceived my support as interference. They'd newly been promoted and kind of going like, why are you intervening? Why, you know, so my need for clarity, speaking to my manager, going like, hey, let's formalize this. Does he know you've asked this of me? This MDK was going like, I know how to do this. I wouldn't be here if I didn't know how to do this. So his need for autonomy and my need for clarity definitely clashed right from the bat. And then I did what I typically do as a 6, and probably more personality traits than just Enneagram related. But I tried structured check-ins. I tried to align goals. I tried to get clarity. I tried to soften feedback. But tension just really, really escalated. And not because he was necessarily unreceptive, my attempts also just didn't land, right? You have to take accountability for some of that too. And so in any event, all these different kind of subtle attempts just failed. And so it was like, it went from awkwardness to quite open conflict in meetings over the short space of about 18 months. And 18 months is a long time, but when you're in it, that goes pretty quickly. So just again, to talk about where this report comes in handy and why this work is so important to me now, there were a number of opportunities for intervention here on all the players as parts. And so I raised my concern I had a very good relationship with manager one, that was the first opportunity for facilitation. But at the time he's like, oh no, just keep going. Like, I'll have a word, like informal, and didn't quite recognize. And I think sometimes when you have a good open relationship and regular check-ins, you miss the urgency and you miss hey, I'm not saying this because I'm just having a conversation. I'm being very, very explicitly clear here. And especially for a 6, we don't say necessarily things that we don't mean and fluff. Like, I'm saying it to you and asking for help because it's needed. And that doesn't always land necessarily. And then 12 months later, when it resurfaced again in a specific way, I actually went to HR, which is interesting because my background's HR. But that was a second missed opportunity for that containment. Again, it's oftentimes it's a corporate cry for help, really. And again, the response there was a little bit, you're all grown-ups, you're all professionals, sort it out. And I think at this stage, this is a sustained period of conflict. I'm not sure curiosity was there on my part anymore either. And so defensiveness creeps in on all parties repeatedly. And I think especially when there is no intervention of any kind, that defensiveness came up definitely on all sides. And so as that pressure mounted, I think when you look at the reports, the stress lines of the 3 and the 6, you can definitely see those stress lines, even though we look quite similar, like you mentioned, Lucille, under stress, they're polarized, right? So when the pressure's on, COVID, tough market, et cetera, tensions and working relationships. Yeah, and so whilst the 3 typically accelerates, I try to slow down. And so again, now you've got this conflict happening, and eventually any kind of trust did break down. Yeah, and so I think you always run the risk, or an organization runs the risk of it being the point of no return, where it'll be really, really impossible to kind of rebuild and regain, not just between the 2 parties, but the support mechanisms around this type of sustained conflict.
And I think there's such wisdom in what you share there. There were 2 big inflection points where there was opportunity for intervention in some way, which passed by. I mean, in your mind, if something like, let's just say there was no intervention, and you were sitting with some of these suggestions in the report. So you had a report, but no intervention. Just how do we navigate conflict? How do we make decisions together? How do we communicate better? Are there any things in this piece of the report that you think could have helped you and Kay navigate this more effectively? Even if the only intervention was having a report that externalizes some of the pressure that's being experienced here.
Yeah, so the way I think about it, like if this report had been present, there's 2 moments I think that would have changed. And so, at the first signs of friction, we don't always have to wait for things to get that heated, like intervene early. I think what it would have done is normalized our differences. And so I think what it would have done, especially for me, is like showed the tension was it's almost boringly predictable. It wasn't personal.
Yes.
Yes. It was bound to happen with this combination. And so, it's just obvious. And the second point, I think, where something like this would have really, really made a difference for all involved is just, again, that depersonalization and an effort to restore psychological safety all around, even if just through the sheer intervention of an intervention. A little bit like the Hawthorne effect, where I know I'm being watched, so I'm acting differently. And so I think that even that sometimes, and then of course, like Madeleine mentioned before, the very practicalities of navigating conflict, help the slowing down, match, like all of the, like swap roles briefly, be in each other's shoes, like really, like facilitated be in each other's shoes. I think there's so much power in that, where we allow that space and time and conversation and pause for both parties to
Mm.
actually experience a little bit about the other's conflict and for other people to be in on what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for other people that, you know, may not have the language, to find some language in the report, I hear might have been helpful. I mean, what we see in the report is there's some really specific things in here, like actual scripts, and there are sections with scripts saying, you know, you can ask this and you can ask that. And for example, if you had Kay ask you a bit more often, so what concern is top of mind for you right now? Or if you heard yourself say to Kay, I can see this matters to you, what results would feel like progress today? Do you think that even just those simple scripts could have been helpful?
Yeah, I think because we both reverted to the same script whenever we did meet, which is, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? That later became unhelpful. And so again, like, I think
Yeah.
when you're frustrated, it's difficult to find that quietness, to find the words. And so again, I think to me, what's been really interesting in some of these reports, individual, team, couples, workplace dynamics, is the language, the actual phrasing of words that you can use to completely change the nature of the dialogue. And I think that, if nothing else, is super, super helpful.
Great. So we are going to take a little pause. Just want to hear if there are any questions that are in the system right now. I mean, interesting, because both of them share Enneagram structural issues, like 9 and 6 both on a line, 6 and 3 both on a line. We're in the Bermuda Triangle, people. 9, 6, 3, they chase each other around the Enneagram in a little triangle. So there's some things that are similar and yet such different contexts in which the reports can be used, and the way in which it showcases dynamics. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop you into a quick breakout room with a couple of other people. And the questions are very, very simple. The questions are, let me pop them on the screen for you. Here we go. Discuss some workplace pairs in your client systems where you think the colleagues can benefit from this report, and maybe some colleagues coaching. We've stirred enough thoughts and ideas for you. And what would be your next steps to help you create the need for this work and sell some colleagues coaching? So just think, just dream together. You don't have to name the actual system and say, oh, I'm thinking of that organization. And yes, there, this kind of thing might be playing out. Maybe that will be helpful. We'll just do 8 minutes, and then we're going to come back and we're going to look at polarization and work pairs before we finish off. So here we go, popping you into breakouts. And we'll see you back here in 8 minutes. And here we go. Welcome back, everyone. And guess what? Because you have just done the thinking about colleagues that you might want to do this work with for the next week, there is an offer for you to get a free colleagues report, including if these people haven't done Enneagrams yet, for a pairing at work. And for those of you that work more in the romantic space, like Sarah Ann with your therapy, if you want to do it for a couple, a romantic couple, just choose the romantic couples version rather than the colleagues version. The sign up is in the chat right now, so you can bookmark that, but we'll also send that out. So a free colleagues report, including Enneagram reports, if they don't yet have them on our system, and that offer is open for the next week. So just fill in the form in the next week. Keep in mind that it's good practice to have the agreement of the people involved if you're going to be doing this, rather than just blindly nominating them. So please talk to them before you fill in the form and they get some emails from us. So just a couple of thoughts on tips for when there is conflict in the relationship. We've already spoken about the harmonics, but keep in mind that inside the Enneagram, there are the patterns of the harmonics that normalize the different ways in which we fight as well. So the 864 pattern, which is more the emotional reactivity under stress, versus the 972 pattern around optimism or escapism. and the 135 problems around solving problems unemotionally. Old language would be the competency types. This doesn't necessarily make them competent. They just go towards skills and practicalities instead of emotions or optimism. And so this can also be helpful if we look at, for example, the example of Ankia and Sam's sample. You have there a lot of emotional reactivity for both of them under stress. 864, 368, if I remember correctly. But then this like, okay, now just get on and do things version of the 3 that may have at times not met the desire for, let's just put our cards on the table here. So the undercover versus the on the table bits of this could have been interesting places where the 2 meet each other differently. But the harmonics are always a great sense maker that depersonalizes part of the dynamic when there's conflict. What I also find very helpful, just have to enable sound, is Jennifer Berger's work on simple stories. And I want to just play a quick video around helping us understand how quickly polarization happens. And the polarization process is where I think of myself as good. And because you're on the other side, I think of yourself as bad. And that's the simple story we make up. Of course, except for the 4s, who are always the baddies themselves, and they make the other people good, which is just very, very complex and upside down. Enneagram 1s can do that too. I'm the baddie, you're the goodie, it's all me. Anyway, my son asked this question when he was watching Star Wars for the first time when he was 8 or 9 years old. We were driving in the car, and he said, "Mommy, I want to know, is Darth Vader a good baddie or a bad goodie?" Now, in the longer run of the world, the complexity of relationships mean that we're all good baddies and bad goodies. Yeah? And that's the place we want to get to, because if good is in me and bad is in you, or vice versa, that polarization will escalate what we're doing. So just for some food for thought, let's look at this as a way of kind of bringing our session towards a close. Here we go. Good baddies, bad goodies. Ooh, and I have to start it from the start.
Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there was a princess trapped in the trappiest mind trap of them all. This mind trap is so trappy because it is so cleverly hidden, like a secret room in a castle tower. It is a way we fall into simple stories. This wasn't always a trap, of course. Humans have been elevated and connected by our stories. They've been a source of meaning and solace to us, at least from the times our ancestors drew pictures on the walls of caves. And they're a core piece of our greatness, as we've been able to share cultural, religious, professional stories that bond us together, create a sense of safety, and let us know what is good and not good to do. But in a world so interconnected and uncertain, so complex and fast-moving as today's world, our habit of simple stories traps us and narrows our focus, hardens our perspective, and stultifies our capacity for creativity. The danger is we don't even know we're trapped by it. Imagine for a minute you are coming home from a hard day. You walk into your living room, and there, just in front of the thrones, you see an unholy mess. Just watch the feast of simple stories your mind creates. We might see in our mind's eye all of the other times we've stumbled over other messes in this way. We know just who made this mess and when, without question. The image of our child, partner, flatmate, bad prince or princess pops into our mind with such clarity that it has to be true. And we know that whatever this person was doing when they thoughtlessly created this mess is not as important or meaningful as the thing we will have to forego as we clean it up. We assign not only character roles, hero, villain, etc., but also intentions behind those roles. In this case, we may see ourselves as the exhausted, hard-working hero off creating good things in the world, and we come home to this mess created by the thoughtless, ungrateful, or perhaps even intentionally disrespectful villain who is not taking responsibility for being a helpful member of our household. We connect every single time something like this has ever happened. The glass of souring milk on the kitchen counter, the lump of toothpaste in the bathroom sink, the wet towel on the floor. And we don't just do this once a day, we do this thousands of times every day. We don't just do this at home, we do this everywhere. We get caught up in these stories and find ourselves believing them and unable to take the perspectives of anyone else or look for a bigger set of possible solutions. How do we extract ourselves from the jaws of this tricky trap? First, we have to notice that our story might be a little simple, and we might be believing it a little hard. Then we can escape using mental gymnastics to use the same data to create multiple stories. We can imagine it could have been this, or this, or this. Perhaps this awful mess wasn't the result of laziness or blatant disregard. Maybe this person got a troubling phone call and heard some bad news at the moment he stepped into the house. Maybe this person had something else on her mind. Maybe this person was framed by someone else in the house making a joke out of an old pattern. And we can try to change the character role once we've noticed we've assigned it. Do you have a villain in your story? See if you can reframe her actions as the hero in her story rather than the villain in yours. She tells herself she is doing things for the greater good and that she is acting in a heroic way. See if you can take her perspective, even for a moment. The point isn't to avoid telling stories. You can't. The point isn't even to avoid telling simple stories. I think that's too hard too. The point is to notice your simple stories, to remember they're simple, believe in them less, and use this practice to multiply the options you are considering. This will weaken the jaws of the trap, give you more possibilities to consider, and, while there's no such thing as happily ever after, escaping the simple stories trap might even make you a more joyful, more connected, more creative human being.
So when we are working with our clients and we catch them in polarization, goodies and baddies, we can give them some opportunities to notice the story and to create another, and then another, and then another. And we can help them see this process not as being disingenuous, but as kind of doing a mental yoga that helps them stretch into new places and at least creates other interpretive pathways, which immediately means that there is a different thing in play. And you can see how the Enneagram helps us do that as well, right? So it's not because they're being an arsehole, it's just because their Enneagram 1 tendencies means that they're very focused on detail, as an example. And you're using the fact that these different possibilities can be generated to increase the likelihood of people meeting each other. When you're coaching a pair of colleagues at work, what you can also do then is to use the coaching to interrupt the stories that they have been building and solidifying, where each one's probably the goodie on their side of the story, and to use the Enneagram to open up these new stories and possibilities. I often get people to actually watch this video as part of the contracting phase of doing some work together. This is an exercise we don't quite have time for, but it's one you can go and work with in your own journaling or in your own reflective practice as a coach. Identify as someone that you've turned into a villain in your own life. Ideally, given the context we've worked with here, someone you work with. Could be a client, could be someone in the broader network, but think in the workspace if you can. And it might be someone who's always been a villain or someone who's lately become a villain. And what you can then try and do is to retell the story so that they become the hero or protagonist of the story. So not that you're the hero, but from their perspective, if they had to say what's going on here, tell the story. And from having done that, put in your pocket 3 alternative stories about this person that you didn't have before, doing that kind of context shifting. And what you'll notice there is that, of course, from a maturation perspective, a colliding perspective, telling the story from their perspective as the hero, that's a colliding perspective, then allows us to pocket different stories, colliding perspectives, but also creates a balcony for us. And it can be super hard. I've had some people go, you can't seriously have me think of this person as a hero. They are evil. Still, do the practice. There's something really important in being able to do that kind of mental and emotional yoga for ourselves. No one wants to be a stiff. We want to be more in flow in our relationships. So I guess from my side, what I'd love for you to do in the chat box is to just put anything, if you were to think about investing in a program that teaches you how to coach triads at work or dyads at work, so yourself and 2 people, 2 colleagues, what would you want from a program like that? You can pop any ideas you have in the chat box. And I guess my final thought as we move forward, I think when we work with others, we do our best work when we hold one purpose, 2 perspectives, and we keep turning back to each other, and we remember to laugh somewhere along the way. Ankia, anything from your side to finish off? Thank you so much for being so generous with your real lived experience. I think in the kind of community of practice space, it's so useful to learn from not theoretical case studies, but real stuff. And then, of course, I'll give it over to you now in a moment, Ankia. Remember, if you want to go check out the reports, if you go into your coach portal and you click on samples and brochures and you click on colleagues report, you can go and look at everything that's in the report, including the exercises towards the end. So Ankia, last word from you. Thanks once again for being here.
No problem. No, thank you for letting me share my experiences and stories. And if anybody wants to discuss it more or have a better understanding of the reports, happy to delve into them on a one-to-one basis. So yeah, please reach out on LinkedIn. I can talk about this stuff all day, every day. So more than happy to connect and spend more time if anybody is interested.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a wonderful day with you. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever in the world you are, and see you again for our next sessions in November. Bye.